Now let's look into the cheat, cheat sheet of kubectl or kubectl cheat sheet. So this page contains a list of commonly used kubectl commands and flags. It's pretty much useful because during my working environment, like when I was working on projects, we have used widely this cheat sheet. So it will come in handy. So most of the times, and so it's very difficult to remember all the commands, all the flags, all the options. So it's better always keep kubernetes documentation with you. Always refer kubernetes documentation. We also always refer kubernetes documentation. I would also urge you to always refer kubernetes documentation. So if you want to autocomplete at this moment, I do not have autocomplete option in my EC2 instance, COPS mission. So if you want to attach that autocomplete option, so you have to add this command basically. So this one. Then you can look into more information here. So we will begin with kubectl context and configuration. So set which Kubernetes cluster kubectl communicates with and modifies configuration information. For that, you can use this. Of course, we have done all these things. So kubeconfig is the environment variable, and then you have attached this kubeconfig, and then this is the configuration file that consists of an access to certain cluster. Then you can get the password for that E2E user using the following commands: kubectl config view and option wo, and then JSON path, and then you have to mention the required. And similarly, after configuration is done, this is the first step of dealing with our cluster, because you should able to connect with the cluster first. If you are able to connect to your cluster, so then the next thing is to apply. We'll use the kubectl apply. For that, apply is the command which manages applications through files defining Kubernetes resources. It creates and updates resources in a cluster through running kubectl apply. So this is the recommended way of managing Kubernetes application and production. So we can create objects. So normally to create an object, Kubernetes manifests can be defined on, we call it as a defined definition files. Either we can use YAML or JSON. The extension could be .yaml, YAML, or .yeml, or .json. Either of these three can be used as an extension for the definition files. So this is how we create a resource or our object. So you say kubectl apply and then option F, and after that you will mention the file or definition file name. Then it will be created. If you want to create a multiple files, if you want to create a object from multiple files, still it is possible. You have to add multiple files here after F option. And if you want to create a resources, if you want to create a resources in all manifest files in directory, from all definition files from directory, directly you can give a directory there. Or else you can also give GitHub repository. So you can start a single instance of Nginx. We have done it using kubectl create deployment Nginx. That's the container name, or that's the name. This is a deployment. This is a deployment object. We can deploy it. So, and after that, image is Nginx. Or simply create a job which prints hello world. So kubectl create job hello world. Image is this. Job name is hello, and then image is busybox 1.28, and what it's gonna do is it's gonna do echo hello world. And similarly, create a cron job that prints hello world every minute. That also possible, but you have to use cron job. The name of the, you have to say the cron job. This is not a job object, this is a cron job object. You see, there are a lot of objects. So the name of this is hello, and name of the image is mentioned here, and then schedule option you have to take, and you have to mention every minute. Okay, every minute, every day, every month, every week, every year. That's what the cron job that we are running here. And finally, get the documentation for pod manifests using kubectl explain pods. And here are some example. Let's create multiple AML objects from stdin, and these are multiple, and this is a secret, this is secret object. So once you have created your objects or resources, then it's time to view and find the resources. To view and find the resources, we'll use kubectl get services. It lists all services in the namespace, and kubectl get pods all namespaces. It will list all pods in all namespaces. And similarly, kubectl get pods option wide lists all pods in the current namespace with more details. When we say option and then wide, it will give more details about that. And if you say kubectl get deployment in mydep, it's gonna list a particular deployment. The deployment resource name is mydep. And if you mention kubectl get pods, it will list all pods in that namespace. By default, we will have a it will fetch from default namespace. And kubectl get pod my pod option aml, it get a pods aml. It will get a pods information in aml script, or it will get a pods aml script. Whatever way you want, you can take it. So now describe commands with verbose output. We will have a describe command. It will describe the either pod or node or deployment or service or replica set or secret, whatever it could be, or config map. And there are more to look into it. These are all basically imperative commands. And here you have a node selector, kubectl get node selector, kubectl get secret, my secret template, and there are more commands, more and more commands. So you have to go through all these commands to get the much more clarity. So once you have viewed your resources, now it's time to update resources. So kubectl set image deployment and upgrade or update this existing deployment with the new image version 2. This is how we will do. Basically, in deployment, we have done it. We have done this exercise. We have updated or upgraded the existing deployment. Then rollouts. These are all rollouts. You can see that kubectl rollout history. This we have used it. And kubectl rollout undo deployment to roll back this one. And this one kubectl rollout undo, and kubectl rollout status, kubectl rollout restart. These are to roll out back to the earlier deployment resource. And cat pod json and kubectl replace. And finally, you can look into the patching resources. So kubectl it will partially update a node, not pod, a node. So kubectl patch node, and then node name will mention, and then information that we are going to attach in that. So patching resources, it's gonna partially update a node or update a container's image, or this kind of activity will be done here. The last one, if you see, it updates a deployments a replica count by patching its scale sub resource. For that, we say kubectl patch and then deployment object, then name of the deployment is nginx deployment, and option is sub resource, and that's equal to scale the value and type merge and option, and how many replicas we want, 2. So, and finally, editing resources. You can edit your resources using Cube Editor, and this is very important. Scale up and scale down the resources. It's scaling resources. You can say kubectl scale a replica option 3 to scale up, and if you reduce it to the current state, to the desired state, if current state is 5 and desired state is 2, that's a scale down. If the current state is 3 and desired state is 6, that's a scale up. So we can use this kubectl scale to scale up and down. Then final, all done, it's time to delete resources. To delete resources, you say kubectl delete option and mention the pod file, or else you can say kubectl delete pod unwanted now. So this will delete a pod with no grace period. And when you say kubectl delete pod service bash foo, this will delete pods and services with same name baz. That's what the benefit of it. So finally, if you want to interact with a running pod like we have done with our Docker, so we can do that. For that, you have to simply say kubectl logs. That's it. It will give you logs of your pod. And even you can do the piping to specifically get a certain information from the logs. And you can do exec. This is also very important. Exec, the exec command runs command in existing pod. Basically, exec is used to enter inside the pod and in one container case. If it is a one container case, if you have a multi-container, then we have to say kubectl exec my pod, and option C, inside you have to specifically mention the container name. Then only you can enter inside that existing pod with multi-container case. And you can start a single instance of nginx pod in the namespace. This is to start a nginx instance in a particular namespace. Here you said option name, and then here you have to give the namespace, so the pod will be started here. So copying the files and directories to and from containers, that also possible using the following commands. Kubectl, you have to say copy cp, and then you have to mention or map the directories from where you want to copy and paste the files. Then more interacting with deployments and services. This is pretty important. To interact with deployments and service, we use logs, and logs you have to mention the deployment name, and again logs deployment, and then inside that deployment, if you want to specifically get the logs of certain container of the pod, basically if it is a multi container pod, then obviously you have to mention the container. And similarly you can do the port forward, so listens to local port and forward to port 5000 on service backend. That's what a port forward. And you can do the exec for even deployment a resource. When you do exec, you can run command in first pod and first container in deployment if it is a single or a multi-container cases. So similarly, you can interact with nodes and cluster. So kubectl cordon my node, basically mark my node as unschedulable. If you cordon, so it will mark it as unschedulable. It will never get scheduled. That node itself will never be scheduled. Then kubectl drain my node in preparation for maintenance. So we want to do maintenance, completely drain the node. And uncordon, so mark my node as schedulable. So initially we have unscheduled it now, so that means we cannot do any operations on that. Now to uncordon, to make it schedulable again, we have to say uncordon. And we can say kubectl top node, and then you have to mention my node, so that matrix for a given, it shows a matrix for a given node. And more information, kubectl cluster info, and more. So that's it. So if you want to see the resources type, you can say kubectl API resources, and these are all, you will get it. These are namespace resources and options. These are very important. These are options which are widely used. If you want to output AML formatted API project, then you say option O space AML. If you want output in the plain text format with any additional information, and for pods the node name is included, you have to use option O wide. And if you want to print only a resource name and nothing else, then option O name. And more, we have used some, we haven't used some, you have to use some. That's it. Custom columns and more information. So kubectl output verbosity debugging, it's not that much important for us. That's what is our cheat cheat sheet, a kubectl cheat sheet. It would be very important, it would be very useful. So I would urge you to go through it, and during your daily work, I would suggest you to use it widely so that you can get a lot of benefit from this cheat sheet.